So you want to get your private pilot's license. You're probably feeling excited and a bit overwhelmed. And trust me, I get it. When I first started, I had no clue where to even start. The process was confusing, expensive, and full of challenges that nobody warns you about. But here's the good news. If you know what you're doing, you can avoid the biggest mistakes, save thousands of dollars, and get that private pilot's license faster than you think. I'm Brad, and I went from 0 hours to having my MEI in just 5 months. And in this video, I'm going to break down everything you need to know from discovery flight to passing your check ride. Plus, I'll show you how to train efficiently, so that way you'll save time and money. So whether you're dreaming of flying for fun or making aviation a career, you're in the right place. So break out that checklist because we're about to take flight. All right, so you're ready to start your flight training, but where do you even begin? The first step is going to be taken to the air in something called a discovery flight. A discovery flight is a low-cost, low-pressure way to see if flying is even right for you. You'll sit in the pilot seat, handle the controls under an instructor's guidance, and get a feel for what training is all about. One pro tip is to make sure that you ask for them to do some maneuvers. Now, a lot of flight schools are going to take you up and just do some straight and level flights and take you to the prettiest part of town before coming back to land at the airport. You're going to want to make sure to ask the instructor to demonstrate some maneuvers like stalls or some steep turns so you can get a feeling for what that's going to be like when you train. Also, ask lots of questions about the avionics and things like that so you can understand how the plane operates and get a feel for what it's going to be like to actually fly. Now, these discovery flights are going to be about $150 to $250 and last typically about an hour. And if you don't leave that flight grinning ear to ear, excited for your next journey to the skies, then maybe aviation isn't for you. And that's okay. But if you're hooked, welcome to the journey. And if you do some maneuvers and you feel a little bit of motion sickness, don't worry. Most pilots feel that as they begin, and you will build a tolerance to that as you continue to train. You've done your discovery flight and you're ready to start your flight training, but there's an important thing you need to do before you get started. You need to go and pass your medical exam. Now, this is something some students overlook before they actually get started. So let's break down why this is an important step. In order to fly, you'll need an FAA medical certification or fly under basic med. There are 3 classes of medical certification, and for a private pilot's license, you'll only need the 3rd class. However, if your sights are set on a commercial airlines job, you'll want to make sure that you can qualify for a 1st class medical license, as that's required for your ATP license later down the road. The exam is pretty straightforward and is performed by an aviation medical examiner or AME. They're going to check your vision, hearing, blood pressure, and ask about your medical history. But here's where most people run into trouble. Certain medications and past mental health conditions can delay your certification or disqualify you completely. These can even be as basic as ADHD or anxiety. But don't panic, there are workarounds if you go about it the right way. So here's my advice. Before you go to the exam, review the FAA medical guidelines. And if you have any concerns before going in, you'll want to talk to your AME before setting your appointment. The last thing that you want to do is spend thousands on flight training just to find out that you can't pass your medical exam. Once getting your medical exam, you've got another critical step before you're just going to want to start throwing money at all this flight training. Choosing the right instructor and flight school is critical to your success going forward, because let's face it, not all schools and instructors are created equal. There are 2 main types of flight schools: Part 61 and Part 141. Part 61 is more flexible, lets you learn at your own pace. It's great for people with busy schedules and is usually less structured with more freedom. Part 141 is an FAA-approved curriculum which is highly structured. This is going to be better for full-time students, and this type of training is required for some scholarships and airline pathways. If you're training part-time or just for fun, most oftentimes Part 61 is going to be the best fit. If you want a structured, more accelerated path because you're considering a career in aviation, then Part 41 is usually going to be the better fit for you. No matter what type of school you choose, there are going to be 3 key factors that you're going to want to consider before picking your school. What really matters is the instructor quality, the aircraft availability, and student success rates. Your instructor will make or break your experience. Find someone who's patient, knowledgeable, and actually cares about your progress. Don't be afraid to switch instructors if something doesn't feel right. If your school only has 1 or 2 aircrafts and they're older and constantly going under for maintenance, your training is going to be frustrating and slow. Look for a school with a well-maintained, diverse fleet in order to avoid scheduling delays. Also, ask them how many of their students pass their check ride on their first attempt. A great school will have a high student success rate as well as a reputation for putting out competent and confident pilots. You can also ask them how many of their instructors are Gold SEAL instructors. Not all great instructors are Gold SEALs, and not all Gold SEAL instructors are great. But it is a good way to see how committed these instructors are to being instructors, as they have to have a high student success rate as well as take some additional tests in order to qualify for that Gold SEAL. Before committing to any school, you want to make sure that you visit, talk to past students, and ask lots of questions. That discovery flight is a great time to evaluate the school and get a feel for the experience that you will have while you're there. All right, so you've got your medical certification, you've gone on your discovery flight at the school that you have chosen. What's our next step? Now it's time to get our student pilot certification, and the best part is this is going to be free and only take about 10 minutes to apply for. You're going to go to IACRA and create an account and apply for your student pilot certificate. Once an instructor verifies your identity, the FAA will process it, and boom, you're officially a student pilot. This certificate is required before you can fly solo. That'll happen later on in your training, but it's best to just go ahead and knock this out early. So a quick recap on getting started. First, you're going to want to take a discovery flight to make sure that flying is right for you. 2 is to get your FAA medical certification to make sure there's no issues. Step 3 is to choose the right flight school so that way you don't waste any time or money. Step 4 is getting your student pilot certification so you're cleared for your solo flights later on. Do these 4 things first and you'll be set up for a smooth start to your training. Let's talk about what happens once you start training, because this is where the hard part really begins. A lot of students underestimate ground school, but it's just as important as actually flying. You'll need to learn about airspace and weather and aerodynamics and navigation and so much more. These are all things you really need to start to understand before you ever leave the ground. There are 3 main ways to cover your ground school education. Option 1 is an online ground school. Something like Sporties, King's School, Gold SEAL, Pilot Institute. These are great for self-paced learners, as well as those who appreciate video, as well as periodical quizzes through their lessons. Option 2 is in-person classes. Some flight schools offer structured classroom instruction in order to cover these topics and give you your endorsements. Option 3 is one everybody should use, which is self-study. The FAA has free resources like the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, known as the PHAK, or the FAR-AIM. Personally, I recommend knocking out your written exam before you take your first flight. I studied and passed all of my written exams before I ever stepped into a cockpit. This made my flight training way easier, as all I had to do was focus purely on flying. Now, you don't have to. You can do it the other way and start your training while still studying for your written exam. You're just going to be juggling flight maneuvers, navigation, and cramming for a FAA test all at the same time. It's not fun. Once you've passed your written exam, now you can officially start your flight training. The FAA requires a minimum of 40 flight hours for your private pilot's license if you're Part 61. It requires a minimum of 35 hours if you're going Part 141. Now, 5 hours may not seem like a big deal. However, if you think about the fact that it's probably $250 to $500 an hour, depending on the aircraft and instructor that you have, we're talking about well over $1,000 in the cost of getting your certification. Now, it's important to note that many student pilots aren't going to be ready for their check ride until they're about 50 to 80 hours. This is going to depend on their aptitude, as well as the frequency of flying and retraining that needs to be done before they're ready. So here's a breakdown of those 40 hours that you'll need before you're ready to go. 20 hours dual instruction, that's flying with the CFI. 10 hours of solo flight, that's practicing on your own. 5 hours of solo cross-country flights, 3 hours night flying, 3 hours of instrument training. This will be flying with a view limiting device. Now, let me be honest, most pilots won't be ready at the 40-hour mark. I trained full-time and completed mine in about a month, but I was about 48 hours of flight time before I was ready for my check ride. Now, if you're doing this part-time and only flying about once a week, you can expect this to take 8 months to even a year. The more frequently you fly, the faster you'll finish, and usually the less amount of hours you'll need in order to be ready. But what are those first lessons going to look like? Many of your first lessons are going to be all about learning how to control the aircraft. You'll start with basic maneuvers like straight and level flight, climbs, descents, turns, slow flights, stalls and stalls recoveries, as well as steep turns. At first, flying feels overwhelming. There's a lot of controls, checklists, and radio calls. But I promise after a few lessons, it'll all start to click. By around 10 to 20 hours, you're going to be focusing exclusively on landings because you're going to be getting prepped for another important milestone, your solo flight. Your first solo is a flight you won't forget. It's a time when your instructor is going to hop out of the aircraft and say, all right, you have flight controls. Here's how you know you are ready to solo. You can consistently land the plane without instructor help. You can handle radio calls and traffic awareness. And your instructor has full confidence in you. They won't sign you off unless they feel like you're ready. Most first solos include 3 takeoff and landings in the traffic pattern. And let me tell you, nothing beats the feeling of touching down after your first solo flight. It's surreal. That's the moment it really sinks in. You're a pilot, and from here on, things are going to move quickly. One fun thing that you'll want to do is make sure that you wear a disposable shirt. This is so your instructor can tear your shirt as a rite of passage for your first solo flight. Once you've soloed, you're now going to start working on your cross countries. This usually means planning a flight of over 50 miles away. However, for student pilots, cross countries can be as little as 25 nautical miles away. First, you're going to do your cross country with your instructor. Then you'll do it again solo. Your biggest challenge here is going to be navigation. At first, flying away from home feels like being thrown into the deep end, but that's the point. This is where you really start feeling like a pilot. Then there's also night flying. The FAA requires 3 hours at night, including 10 takeoff and landings. Flying at night is absolutely beautiful, but also challenging. Your depth perception is going to be different, and airports can be harder to spot if you don't know what you're looking for. And here's a big tip. Use pilot-controlled lighting. By tuning in the airport frequency, clicking your microphone can activate the lights to make the runway much more visible. That's a full training process, from ground school through your solos to being check ride ready. If you train consistently 2 to 3 times a week, you can complete this in around 5 to 6 months. Again, if you're training less often than that, you can expect this process to take closer to a year. Now we need to get check ride ready. This is where we go from training mode to actually getting our license. If you're finding this video helpful, smash that like button. Let's jump on to the next step. Let's be real. Flight training isn't cheap. The cost of getting your private pilot's license can be anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 depending on the frequency of your flying, your aptitude, and the aircraft that you're training on. And here's the thing. Most students spend way more than they have to when doing their flight training. So I'd like to show you a few ways to cut costs, train effectively, so you can save thousands of dollars without sacrificing quality. Before you spend a single dollar, check out aviation scholarships. There are hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding available every year, but most student pilots never apply. Don't make that mistake. Check out the AOPA Flight Training Scholarships. You can get up to $14,000 for your PPL or other advanced ratings. The EAA Ray Aviation Scholarship covers full PPL training for young aviators. And if you're a woman, there are several other scholarships that you may apply for. Women in Aviation International Scholarships offer over $1 million awarded annually. The 99 scholarships are for female pilots pursuing all levels of training. My advice, apply for every scholarship you qualify for. Even if you get just one, that could cover books, flight hours, or even your entire written exam fee. One of the most costly mistakes that I see students make is taking long breaks in between their lessons. If you fly once a week, you can expect to spend half of your lesson relearning the things you forgot, which means it takes even longer and more flight hours and more money before you're check ride ready. Simply put, More hours means more money. You're going to want to fly at least 2 to 3 times a week to make sure that your skills stay sharp. Avoid taking long periods of time off or going on a vacation. I know it's inconvenient, but dedicating this time now towards your flight training is going to save you a lot of time and money in the end. And if you're in a position where you just can't afford to fly that often, consider purchasing a simulator. And it doesn't have to be anything advanced. Using something like X-Planes or Microsoft Flight Simulator can keep your skills fresh. You can practice procedures, your radio calls, and even flight planning between lessons. It's not a perfect substitute, but it does help retain that knowledge and cut the cost. And did you know where you choose your training can have a big impact on your cost? Some flight schools charge $150 an hour, some charge $350 an hour on the same aircraft. And that can make a massive difference in your bottom line. So try and look for a smaller airport. Bigger airports usually have higher fuel and operating costs, which means they have to pass those along. You can also try and find places where the competition is a bit higher, as that's going to keep the pricing more competitive. And you may also want to investigate some Part 141 schools that have some financial aid opportunities. Some schools offer financing, or you may even be able to use your GI Bill if you're a veteran. You're going to want to make sure that you compare these rates before you choose your school, as this will be a key factor in helping keeping your bottom line where it's supposed to be. Hit the subscribe button if you're finding value out of this video, and don't forget to turn on your notifications so you won't miss any future videos. You'll also want to train in a fuel-efficient aircraft. A Cessna 150 burns about half the fuel of a Cessna 172. Flying a smaller, fuel-efficient aircraft during training can save you hundreds of dollars. Then, once you get your license, you can transition to a larger aircraft. So let's do a quick recap, as this can save you thousands. Make sure that you're applying for scholarships. Fly frequently and avoid unnecessary breaks. Train at a smaller, budget-friendly airport and fuel-efficient aircraft. Just 1 to 2 of these tips can be a huge difference in how much you spend over the course of your flight training. Flight training is an investment, but it doesn't have to break the bank. Now that you know how to save some money, let's take a look at some common challenges. Because let's face it, even the best students are going to hit roadblocks. Flight training is one of the most rewarding experiences that you'll ever do. It's not always going to be clear skies and zero turbulence. Every student pilot is going to face challenges, and if you're not prepared, they're really going to slow you down or even make you want to quit. Here are 3 of the biggest struggles that I see student pilots deal with and how to handle it. So if this is your first time using a radio, it can be kind of terrifying to talk to ATC. You'll feel like everyone is sitting there, including your CFI, just waiting on you to mess up. But here's the reality. Even an experienced pilot is going to make mistakes. I'll never forget the last flight I took before my MEI check ride. We were actively listening on guard, which is an emergency channel that your instructor will tell you about. We were headed back to the airport. A first officer, our captain on Delta, actually made a cabin announcement over guard. They were telling us about the weather when they landed and how they were going to be bringing refreshments around. Of course, a lot of other commercial guys got on there and started ordering a Coke and telling them to make sure they bring their favorite snack to them. As you can see, even the most seasoned pilots can make communication errors whenever they're using the radio. You can also use the live ATC app to listen to real controllers and pilots at your local airport or even at larger airports as you start to get more proficient. Another key is practicing at home whenever you're chair flying. You can read scripted radio calls out loud. It's kind of like learning a new language. Remember, ATC wants to help you. If you're feeling nervous or you're making some mistakes, just add in student pilot. Controllers will slow down and they're going to work with you. No judgment. I made a video about ATC calls. You can check out the card, or I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to check that out. One of the most frustrating and uncontrollable situations that you're going to run into in your training is weather cancellations. You book a lesson, you get to the airport, you're hyped up and ready to fly, and boom, weather cancels it. So how do you stay on track now that you just lost your flight? Well, you can turn this canceled flight into a ground lesson. You can review your emergency procedures, navigations, or some weather theory, especially the weather that just canceled your flight. You can also use the simulators to stay sharp. Practice those cross-country flights and instrument procedures. And of course, you can always try and book a flight later on in the day. Bad weather doesn't have to mean a waste of time. Now, at some point in your training, you're going to hit a learning plateau. This is where no matter how hard you push, no matter how hard you're trying, you just can't take that next step forward. I've seen this happen at different times with students. whether it's preparing for the oral side of your check ride, or maybe it's just a crosswind correction for your landings. It can be frustrating because sometimes it feels like it clicks and then the next day you just totally forget. So advice I give my students is to take a step back. Sometimes a short break can help things click as soon as you return. You can also ask your CFI for a different approach. A new explanation or technique can change everything. I also liked flying with different instructors. Getting that fresh and new perspective is sometimes exactly what I needed for that concept to sink in. I've seen students struggle for weeks with a maneuver and then switch instructors for one flight and suddenly nails it. Sometimes a different CFI explains things in a way that just makes sense. Now, one other thing you want to be aware of if you're going to an accelerated program like I did, you want to really be careful of burnout. Pushing too hard, too fast can actually slow you down. I was pressing so fast, I was going to complete everything in a 4-month time schedule. This was proving to just be way too much stress and showcased itself when I failed my commercial check ride. And I had failed on a power off 180, which was this nasty thing that I'd built up in my mind. I was nailing them during my trainings and even nailed them during my retrains, but realized I'd placed so much stress on myself that was the cause of my failure. So make sure that you're taking breaks when you need it. One skipped lesson is actually better than pushing through mental fatigue and not learning the things you need to learn. You're also going to want to prioritize your sleep and rest. Fatigue affects reaction times and your decision making. And stay connected with other pilots. Sharing struggles with others makes it easier to overcome. I trained full-time and earned all of my ratings in a 5-month time span. If I had to do it all over again, I would have stretched it out and scheduled some more rest days, as doing it in 5 months versus 7 or 8 months really isn't that big of a difference and would have made the experience much more enjoyable. It also would have given my brain plenty of time to absorb all of the knowledge and the skills that I was trying to learn. You've put in the hours, you've mastered your maneuvers, and now there's only one thing standing between you and your private pilot's license: the check ride. For a lot of pilots, this is the most nerve-wracking part of training, but it doesn't have to be. I'm going to walk you through everything you can expect from the oral to the flight so you can feel confident and prepared. The practical exam, or the check ride, is going to start with the oral exam. This is where you're going to sit down with a DPE usually, or a designated practical examiner. Things you'll be tested on here is weather interpretations, so how to read a METAR, a TAF, and making a go or no-go decision. You'll also be asked about airspaces and regulations, so you're going to want to know your VFR weather minimums and all of your sectional chart symbols. You're also going to want to understand your aircraft systems, so how your plane works, including the engine, the fuel, electrical, and emergency procedures. You'll also want to understand flight planning as well as your performance calculations, so your weight and balance. That includes your takeoff and landing distances, as well as the ability to pick out your altitude that you'll fly at. The examiner is not there to trick you. They just want to see if you can think like a pilot. If you don't know the answer, don't guess at it. Just say, I don't know, but I know where to find it. This is one of the most important skills that DPEs say they often don't see student pilots use when they're at a check ride. Understanding where to find information and resources is critical because you're not always going to have a CFI with you. I remembered as I kept doing check rides, I would even pause and just say, I think I know the answer to this, but I know where to find it, and I'm going to double check just to be sure. This is really good decision making, as it showed that I was rather risk adverse and I wasn't just going to answer questions being 70% sure. The same should be for every pilot. You shouldn't go and only be a little sure that you're actually going to make it to your destination. You should know for sure before making decisions, especially when it comes to aviation. Your life and the people's lives in your plane ride on your decision-making ability. Now, the oral exam is going to last probably anywhere from an hour to 2 hours as you cover those topics. All of the topics that you could be asked about are going to be found in your private pilot ACS. This is going to be a critical study tool for you to ensure that you're ready to go before you take the exam. Once you pass the oral side of the exam, it's time to take the flight. This is your opportunity to demonstrate that you can fly safely and confidently under the ACS or Airman Certificate standards. The things you'll do during flight are going to be a normal and short field takeoff and landings. You'll do a steep turn holding 45 degrees of bank. You'll enter in slow flight, showing that you can control the aircraft at minimum speeds. You'll do stall and stall recoveries, including both a power on and power off stall. You'll also do some emergency procedures, so simulating those emergencies and being able to troubleshoot them in flight. You'll also showcase your navigation, including picking an alternate airport in a diversion scenario. For that first check ride, one of the biggest surprises for me was just how much my examiner wanted me to succeed. He wasn't expecting perfection from me, he was expecting me to showcase my skills. At some flight schools, they do what's called a touch and go on landings. So they'll come down, they land, but they don't come up to a complete stop before they take off again. We really didn't do that at my school, and so when the DP asked for that, it kind of threw me off. As I started to take off again, I left my landing flaps in, just not thinking at all. He asked me how the plane felt and if everything was okay, and he could tell on my face that I had noticed like my speeds weren't right and I was just having to adjust my angles and the plane just felt weird, and that's when I realized that I'd left my landing flaps in. I took out my flaps and got into a proper configuration as I started entering my turns for the pattern. He asked me if everything was okay, as you could see the stress kind of building on my face. That's when I took the time to take a deep breath, reset, and continued my flight without any issues. Now that was just an example of one of the mistakes that I made. I actually made a couple, including one in the oral as well. I made a few small mistakes, but the important thing was I stayed calm and corrected them. The DPEs aren't looking for a perfect pilot. They're looking for a competent and safe pilot. Your check ride day can be stressful, but I made an entire video dealing with those anxieties. You can check out the card here or the description down below. But I really wanted to take the time to give you just a couple of tips to stay calm on your check ride day. You're going to want to make sure that you get a full night's sleep. Don't stay up cramming, really trust your training. And think of your DPE as your very first passenger. You're flying to showcase them a safe and smooth flight. Also, narrate what you're doing. Examiners love when you explain your thought process as you fly. Lastly, take your time and don't rush. Stay ahead of the plane and think before you act. Most students who fail their check ride do so because they panic and they let one mistake snowball into more. If something goes wrong, do what I did. Take a deep breath, collect your thoughts, and fly the plane. Earning my private pilot's license was one of the most challenging and rewarding experiences of all of my training. Looking back, the journey was filled with challenges, long study nights, and moments where I doubted myself. But the first time I flew solo, and especially when I passed my check ride, it made every second of my training worth it. Now, it's your turn to take the same journey, and I promise whether you're pursuing a career or doing it for fun, you are on an incredible adventure. If you know somebody who is looking to pursue becoming a pilot, please share this video with them. Also hit this like button so more future pilots can find this video as well. If you need a step-by-step breakdown on how to become a pilot, plus money-saving strategies, training hacks, and study tips, download my free beginner's guide to becoming a pilot. This guide is packed with practical tips and knowledge to help you succeed in your training experience. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know where you are in your training, or if you've already completed it, what was your favorite part? Remember, this is just the beginning, and if you need more helpful advice, check out this video right here. Whether you're flying full-time or you're flying once a week, just remember every flight gets you closer to your goal. So keep going, stay motivated, and most importantly, keep the grass off your wingtips, aviators.